Good evening, everyone. I am so pleased to welcome you to Advocacy in Action. Tell your story, amplify your impact, a storytelling webinar. My name is Loida Garcia Fibo, and I serve as chair of the IFLA Management of Library Associations section, also known as MLAS. This web event is part of the Building Strong Library Associations initiative from the Management of Library Associations section of IFLA, which includes events with library associations, webinars, and a mentoring initiative, all centered around 5 priority areas: library advocacy, financial sustainability, membership retention, strategic planning, and information integrity. For the last several years, MLAS has collaborated with the regional divisions and other IFLA sections to present webinars, and we are delighted to continue collaborating to help build strong library associations per our charge, which is on the MLAS website. Tonight's event is the result of a wonderful collaboration between IFLA MLAS, the IFLA North America Regional Division, the New Professional Special Interest Group, and the Women in Information and Library Special Interest Group. I would like to begin by thanking all the partners for all their work to make this event happen. And also thanks to the speakers and volunteers who made this webinar possible. Your dedication to strengthening our field is deeply appreciated. Our speakers today are MLAS chair, myself, right? And then we have the North America Regional Division Chair, Diane Cohen. Kimberly Silk, IFLA Impact Trainer. Catherine McColgan, Manager, Administration and Programs at the Canadian Association of Research Libraries. Hilary Murphy, Branch Manager at the Milliken Mills Library at Markham Public Library in Canada, and Amelia N. Aldred, Deputy Director for State and Local Advocacy at the American Library Association. We know that library associations are essential advocates for our profession, whether it's speaking up for funding, defending intellectual freedom, or promoting equitable access to information. Associations help ensure that libraries have a seat at the table where decisions are made. In today's fast-changing environment, libraries everywhere face political, economic, and social challenges. It's more important than ever to communicate clearly and effectively about the value we bring to our communities. And one of the most powerful tools we have to do that is storytelling. I believe it during my term as president of the American Library Association. One of my initiatives was to dedicated to address library advocacy. And within that, we provided materials to support librarians in the area of storytelling for library advocacy. So I am a believer. Storytelling connects us, it humanizes statistics, empathy, and it inspires action. And when we tell our stories, whether as individuals, as libraries, or associations, we move hearts and minds. And we show that libraries are not just buildings, but dynamic forces for education, equity, innovation, and freedom. And that's exactly what we'll be exploring together this evening. We'll hear from experts and colleagues who are using storytelling as a strategic tool to strengthen advocacy and raise the profile of libraries across North America and beyond. And we hope that these examples and this information is helpful for other library associations and other libraries in different regions of the world. This event is also part of MLA's ongoing commitment to building strong library associations globally. We want to empower associations with the skills, tools, and networks they need to thrive. And we believe storytelling is a critical part of that work. Thank you again for joining us. I invite you to engage fully, ask questions, share your experiences, and think about how you can bring what you learned tonight back to your libraries and associations. Together, let's continue telling our stories and amplifying our impact. And now let's begin our journey into the art and power of storytelling. And with you, I would like to introduce Diane Coyne, Chair of IFLA North America Regional Division.
Thank you, Loida. Hello, everyone. Our regional division, the North American Regional Division, is certainly pleased to collaborate with Loida's MLAS section and the special interest groups, the new professionals, and the Women in Information and Libraries. NARD, as we affectionately call our regional division, works closely with library associations across Canada and the United States. We are strong advocates for libraries and library associations, and this webinar is an example of our advocacy and outreach work, and we're delighted you're with us today and hopefully watching us in the future. Today's webinar is focused on telling your stories, and in doing so, putting your library on the map. Our aim in this webinar is to introduce to you or reinforce the concepts needed to write a great story with impact. Your libraries and your efforts are making a difference in your communities, whether it's small scale and in some cases, large scale. The key is to let people know the impact you're making through storytelling. Next slide. Storytelling is a vital marketing tool that can help amplify your library's voice and communicate its impact to stakeholders, decision makers, and communities. During this webinar, we hope to encourage you to craft some incredible stories and perhaps consider posting them on IFLA's Library Map of the World for use by people in your region or globally and to inspire others. Next slide. Here's the challenge. Have you ever tried to find current library data for your country to back up a proposal you're writing or to incorporate that data into an article? It can be hard. A few years ago, colleagues at IFLA began questioning how can we successfully advocate for libraries and their users without current basic metrics and information about the content and context within which libraries operate. The Library Map of the World emerged out of this need for a global advocacy tool. Many of you have used it. For those that are that are new to it, we encourage you to take a look. We wanted to be able to collect and visualize data from one or more countries and at the same time create a place to document our contributions to the UN Strategic Development Goals, the SDGs. So IFLA embarked on a mammoth collaboration with hundreds of library organizations around the world to do this important work. Next slide. Currently, the Library Map of the World is tracking data from almost 3 million libraries, indicating how many of them have internet access. Right now, it's supported by 1.6 million staff, 640,000 volunteers. The map covers a little over 1 billion registered users, making 5.7 billion visits per year. These are really powerful numbers to share with funders, with governments, and donors. Next slide. The Library Map of the World allows you to get a detailed country profile on specific parts of the world. 32 profiles are available. And a team from our North American Regional Division contributed to Canada's profile this past year. And we're really very proud of the work. It's detailed, it's comprehensive, and it makes a great contribution to the region. Powerful, important information can be used by all libraries across Canada and the globe. Next slide. My North American colleagues, Hilary Murphy from Markham Public Libraries in Canada, and Catherine McColgan from the Canadian Association of Research Libraries, have tied their inspiring stories to the UN's Sustainable Development Goals. The SDGs provide a powerful structure for talking about the difference libraries can make. Next slide. So we encourage you to enjoy the webinar. Your stories do make a difference, and they are truly a powerful marketing tool. I will now turn the floor over to Kimberly Silk, Impact Trainer Extraordinaire, to walk us through how to create a powerful story with impact that can be used in a variety of ways in your community. And hopefully you'll consider adding it to the IFLA Library Map of the World to inspire others. Thank you, and the floor is yours, Kim.
Thank you, Diane. Hello, everyone. My part of the presentation is going to talk about the different parts of storytelling that will help you craft your story. So let's start. What's really storytelling? Well, it's a connected series of events that are told through words, imagery, body language, could be performance music or any other form of communication. And when we use storytelling for advocacy, we are using stories and real life examples to be able to connect with an audience with the aim to influence their opinions and their actions about a specific issue. And really, it's using stories to transform abstract concepts into relatable, emotionally relevant experiences, a way of making complex issues more accessible and understandable. And ultimately, we want to inspire people to act and to take action. Evidence-based storytelling is a way of telling a story that is grounded in evidence. And here in library land, when we think about evidence, we really like to use data as a form of evidence. So evidence-based stories combine the power of storytelling with the rigor of evidence to engage, persuade, and influence others. The data make the stories real and relevant and grounded, and the stories make the data matter, make it emotionally relatable. When we combine data and stories, we get evidence-based storytelling. Whoops. Every story must answer 3 questions. First, we have the why. We explain why the action was necessary. And when we're talking in evaluation, we often talk about the reason something has to happen as an intervention. So the first part of the story has to talk about why um, uh, why is about the community that where the project or the program or the intervention took place, and understanding that community in terms of its demographics and in terms of its characteristics and its conditions helps us understand the context of that story. The second piece is the what. Here we describe in detail the action that we took, how we did it, and when we did it. So here we want to get into the details of the program or the intervention. What did we do? When did we do it? How did we do it? And who was involved? This is a place where statistics can really play a powerful role, as well as community demographics. The third piece is the impact. This is where we want to describe the impact or the change that was brought about, and what change was created in the community and for the people who were involved. So we want to include some proof and results here. Again, data plays a great part here, as well as testimonials from the participants themselves about the change that was brought about. With every story, context matters an awful lot. We need to think about our specific audience when we're telling a story. We need to consider the understanding of the issue from their points of view. And we need to understand from their perspective how much time they have. That will impact how we tell our story. We need to consider how much the audience knows about our topic already. We don't want to bore them, but we want to give them enough information to get them hooked and interested. We need to understand who our audience thinks of as an authority. How can we make sure that the story that we're telling is relevant and meaningful to our audience? It's really important to understand our audience's goals. How can we show that the library can be a big part about accomplishing the goals that our audience have? Many times when working and thinking about the stories that we're telling, consider our audience. Perhaps it is members of a city council, perhaps they are part of a funding organization. Think about what their goals are and think about how can the library help them achieve those goals. Change is an interesting thing, and these two diagrams describe how change occurs. So if when we're using evidence-based stories, we are, as I said, it has three parts. We need to describe why the action was needed, and we need to incorporate data there to explain what the community conditions are. We need to describe what we did, the action that was taken, how we did it, when, and who was involved. And we want data there too. Some statistics there is really, really useful. And the third piece is talking about what was the impact of that action. And again, data here, particularly in the form of testimonials, is really, really useful. When we think about change over time, you'll see on the arrow on your screen starts with in the bottom left-hand corner is that the first indicator that change has occurred is when there is an increase in awareness about the issue that we're discussing. And then as time goes on, more change occurs. We then move from awareness to gaining some knowledge and skills. And based on the knowledge and skills that we are gaining over time, we will begin to change our attitudes and behaviors about an issue. And then in the much longer term, you start to see societal change or change at scale. And so when we think about in evaluation, we call it the theory of change, that short-term change tends to be an increase in awareness, letting people know about something they didn't know about before. And that longer-term change is when we can start to see a change in societal behaviors and attitudes about those things. So to give you an example, beyond all the theory that I've just given you, I'm very happy to turn this over to Hilary Murphy at Markham Public Library. Markham is a community not too far from Toronto, Canada. Hilary?
Thanks, Kimberly. So examples of advocacy stories can range in scale and impact, and I'm excited to share with you an example of how program outcomes can create a narrative at the local level. In 2024, Markham Public Library launched a digital literacy initiative called Girls in STEAM. The program not only contributed to MPL's work in cultivating high levels of digital literacy in the community, but also sought to address the issue of gender-based inequity in STEM education and employment. So as Kimberly said, for context, Markham is a community of approximately 375,000 people. It's adjacent to Toronto, Ontario, Canada. Markham is home to approximately 1,500 ITC sector businesses employing over 34,000 residents and hosts headquarters of significant international tech businesses, the likes of IBM, Asus, and Lenovo, just to name a few. Because of this tech sector, digital literacy is a major priority for the city of Markham, and the library has been central to the mission to create a digitally literate community and a talent pipeline for this industry. So back to Girls in STEM. The story begins with a conversation between MPL and a local tech incubator focused on the impacts of the COVID pandemic. While gender equity in STEM has consistently been an issue, following the pandemic, this partner identified a sharp decline in female-owned tech firms. So to quantify that, prior to the pandemic, approximately 25% of their clients were women. But emerging from the pandemic, this number dropped to 0. Further investigation revealed a similar global picture, with women making up just 30% of researchers in science, technology, and innovation. The research then led us to a UK study that looked at the factors suppressing women's participation in STEM education and employment. This study found that while children of all genders are equally likely to be interested in STEM subjects beginning at the age of 6, there's a significant and rapid drop in girls' interest in STEM by the age of 11. This study identified 4 contributing factors to the decline. First, a lack of representation of women in STEM fields. Next, a lack of access to mentors. Next, a lack of social support for pursuing STEM education or employment. And lastly, a lack of belief in their ability to succeed in the field. The Girls in STEAM program was specifically designed to address these factors. Next slide. So the Girls in STEAM program was designed by MPL staff, which included a team of 6 women who had educational and employment experience in STEM fields prior to their careers at MPL. The program was designed as a cohort-based learning model for girls in grade 9. The program ran over the course of 8 weeks and featured weekly meetups where MPL staff delivered 20 to 30-minute micro lessons that participants could immediately apply in developing a STEAM-based solution to a community issue of their choice. So working in teams, the girls designed projects, which included some pretty cool things. It included a distribution platform for reducing food waste, and cybernetic pants to support mobility for individuals experiencing disability. The program also featured a mentorship component. Each of the girls was paired with a mentor who was a female established in the STEAM profession, who provided both personal mentorship and supports for their projects. The mentors included female engineers from the city of Markham. We also had an environmental scientist, a health science professional, and some science educators, all of whom provided exposure to a range of STEM-based careers. Next slide. Each aspect of the program was designed to address one of the key determinants of ongoing engagement of women in STEAM. For example, the meetups were designed to build confidence and skill and bolster the participants' belief in their potential for success in STEM education. The cohort model was intentional to address the need for young women to experience a supportive social network of peers who are similarly interested in STEM. The mentorship aspect provided exposure to role models and supported the need for representation in STEM employment. And further, the projects were rooted in community, aligning with research suggesting that one of the most valued aspects of STEM work is positive social impact. So by having the girls choose projects they were interested in and that they believed would positively impact their communities, they could connect STEM principles directly to positive social change. The program was also fully endorsed by the executive leadership team at the City of Markham. So Markham's mayor provided the opening address for the program and also officiated the closing ceremony, adding to the prestige of participating. The closing ceremony was an opportunity for the participants to showcase their projects to family and friends, which further solidified the social support for their work. Next slide. Both the outcomes of the program and the feedback from participants demonstrated success. In addition to the formal objectives we measured, the anecdotal feedback we heard from participants pointed to the social connections the girls made with each other. None of the participants knew each other prior to the start of the program, yet they formed connections and friendships as a result of their participation. Because of the involvement of community partners and mentors, as well as city officials, stakeholders had direct experience of the impact of this program. These outcomes were critical in demonstrating the value of the program as a component of MPL's ongoing work on its digital literacy mandate. So the purpose of sharing this story with you is to demonstrate the potential for local initiatives to create opportunities that demonstrate value and alignment and build relationships, all of which are key to advocacy work. So with that, I will now turn things over to Catherine McGolkin, who has another amazing, impactful story to share with you. So Catherine.
Thanks very much, Hillary. I'm going to talk to you today about the Marrakesh Treaty. The implementation of the Marrakesh Treaty to facilitate access to published works for persons who are blind, visually impaired, or otherwise print disabled came into force in 2016, and it's the first ever WIPO treaty that has users' rights in mind, presenting an unprecedented opportunity for access to printed works for people who are blind or print disabled. Libraries play a key role in facilitating access to these works. And so in 2019, the Association of Research Libraries, ARL, and the Canadian Association of Research Libraries, CARL, began a collaborative initiative to implement the Marrakesh Treaty and provide a pathway of practices and documentation for all libraries to follow to fulfill the Marrakesh Treaty's promise of access to works across national borders to end what we term as the book famine. CARL and ARL created a task force to lead this international initiative in Canada and the United States to explore requirements for both research libraries and the user community to effectively implement cross-border exchange of materials. The ARL-CARL task force identified 4 main areas of exploration: beneficiary needs, metadata requirements for searching and discovery, implementing the discovery systems within the library, and developing strategies and opportunities to socialize the work being done. So the beneficiary working group held focus groups with beneficiaries, interviewed directors from pilot institutions, and consulted with leaders and experts of related projects such as Emma and the DAISY Consortium. Our group also met with the U.S. National Library Service for the Blind and Print Disabled and the World Intellectual Property Organization Accessible Book Consortium to develop a holistic view of the needs of the beneficiary community and where the gaps lie. The working group found that misunderstandings about what copyright law allows for making works accessible and lending works for people with print disabilities persist among staff, faculty, and students at higher institutions, and that institutions have unnecessary policies that create even more barriers for the beneficiary community. Another key finding is that the needs of graduate students and faculty beneficiaries may be quite distinct from undergraduate needs. For example, graduate students may need to access specialized texts in languages other than English. On the metadata side, the group analyzed sample descriptive records from pilot institutions, developed a metadata specification with the minimum required metadata elements for the pilot, agreed upon additional recommended metadata elements for use in alternate format description, and recommended controlled vocabularies. The work The working group found there was a lack of best practices for alternate format description, an absence of equivalent English and French vocabularies, and significant challenges for catalogers in verifying, selecting, and describing accessibility features. To answer this, the working group collaborated with other like-minded groups to improve MARC 21 cataloging standards to include accessibility descriptors, which were formally approved in the fall of 2024. The systems implementation working group explored the use of available technologies in place at member libraries. To leverage the capabilities of library service platforms currently deployed in pilot member sites, the working group discovered that the Ex Libris Alma library services platform and Primo, the discovery system, were most widely used by libraries on both sides of Canada-US border, and therefore would be the platforms to use to strategize, document, and pilot a test implementation. From the strategy and operations side, while ensuring that the work of the project was proceeding as planned, the working group also focused on promoting and socializing the work of the project and its findings. Through those public engagements, it became clear there is a real lack of awareness about, one, the Marrakesh Treaty generally, a misunderstanding of how it applies to local copyright laws, and a lack of resources available to people with print disabilities in their difficulties in finding and using learning materials. And this needed to be addressed. So what were the outcomes? Well, cataloging standards were created to commonly describe accessible formats and are now available through MARC 21 fields 341 and 532. I note that the refinement to 341, as I mentioned earlier, was approved in February 2024. Vendors are adopting the use of the 341 and 532 fields. One example, as was announced by OCLC just this past March. We've identified the limitations within library service platforms that will require some standardization in the use of discovery metadata. And finally, we are developing guidelines and informational materials to help everyone on campus better know how to better manage making print alternative versions of learning materials available to those who need it. And with that, I will turn it over to Amelia.
Hello, everyone. So I'm going to be talking about storytelling in action. So you've heard some fantastic examples of wonderful stories and wonderful advocacy stories. You've heard the theory behind these advocacy stories and how to develop them. And I'm going to be pulling this together to bring back these stories that you've just heard and kind of how they work, why they work. And then I'm also going to be talking about the audience perspective upon hearing these stories, and then some real examples of other advocacy stories, and again, how we use them to spark change. And then we will end with some resources for how you can do this and to implement this. Next slide, please. So to start off, you heard about how to develop your advocacy story and these very important components of taking people through data, what data to present, in what order, and why all of these components are so important. Now, that is the perspective of the person who is writing this story. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the audience's journey. So as you heard about the theory of change and how we are moving our audience from awareness to action. And so what is that journey like? What are those components of the journey, and how does that loop into our storytelling? The first part of your audience's journey, from their perspectives, is they're learning about the issue and the problem that they care about. And thinking back to what Kimberly said, that you really need to know your audience. Different audiences are going to have different priorities. And so adapting your story to your audience's priorities is really key here, so that you are framing the issue, you are framing the problem to align to their priorities and what they care about. So now that you've established that, then your audience is going to hear about the solution to this problem that they've just learned about. So we established that there's a problem that is connected to their own values and priorities. Now they're going to hear what the solution to that problem is. Then we take them to the obstacles. So this is when we think about what we ultimately want our audience to do, this is us really explaining that context of what needs to happen in order for this solution to occur. And then we move into how they can overcome those obstacles. And this is as we think about how to develop our advocacy story and the difference between most storytelling and specifically advocacy storytelling is that we ultimately need our audience to walk away knowing that there is something that they can do about this problem that they care about and what to do about that problem that they care about. So again, at this point in the journey, they're going to learn about how they can overcome those obstacles. And then finally, they receive the call to action. And this last step is very key. So something that many people forget to do as they put together their advocacy story is to tell people, tell their audience what exactly they need them to do. We often are very good at explaining the data. We're often very good at explaining the stakes. We can be good at bringing in visuals, but we might present this beautiful story and all of this important data, but we don't actually tell our audience what to do. And that is really what differentiates an advocacy story from every other kind of story, is that we are moving our audience from awareness to action. And so we need to be able to tell them what that action is. And as you think through your audience and how you're adapting that advocacy story to your audience, one of the first things I always recommend that people do is think about what your call to action is, because that's really going to affect how you're presenting the data, how you're framing the solution. What obstacles are you going to present to this audience? Because you want it all to pull back to something that they can actually do. And so depending on your audience, they're going to have different capabilities. They're going to have different spheres of influence. And so if I'm presenting a advocacy story to a group of decision makers, I'm going to be asking them to make a specific decision. That might be around funding, that might be around a policy, that might be other types of support or actions. Versus if I am perhaps talking to a group of constituents that I want them to call their elected official, I want them to tell other decision makers what to do. The call to action is going to be for them to reach out to their decision makers. And so I'm not asking them to necessarily make the decision or to release funds for something. They don't have that power, but they do have the power to tell their elected official what they want them to do. And so, again, when we think through our audience and what our audience is capable of doing, and then what we need them to do in this situation, that is, I think, a good way. And so when you are thinking through writing your story, sometimes it can be helpful to work backwards as you think about your audience's journey, and as you put together all those pieces of data and how you're framing it for them. Next slide, please. So as I said, this is when looping back to all those elements and all those kind of data that Kim was talking through. This is why we explain why the action was necessary. It's looping back to that audience journey of how does this connect to their values? How does this connect to this problem that we've presented to them? How does this ultimately relate to a solution? Why is this a solution? Then going back to how we did the action. So when we think about our audience journey, this is when we are bringing in, again, the details about that solution, why this solution in particular, and how that relates to the problem that they've just learned about, and of course, ultimately their priorities that they want us to address. And then showing the impact, and so the impact of that action on people. And so again, thinking back to our audience journey and thinking back to the beginning of it when we look at what are their priorities, what are their values, what are their needs, that being able to explain the impact of the action ultimately is telling them this is how we are meeting your needs. This is how we are responding to your priorities. And so those elements of storytelling, the why and the how and the impact, not only help us organize the story and make sure that we're including all the context and the data that our audience needs to hear, it is also looping back to their journey of moving from awareness, sometimes ultimately moving from not being aware at all to now being aware to having an action that they can take. Next slide, please. So you've heard two really fantastic stories, and I'm going to now break down how these stories and why these stories work as advocacy stories. So the first one, we talked about girls in STEM, and we broke down, we have here, you can see in the chart, the why, the what, and the impact. But I'm also going to add that layer on of the audience journey. So the first was the why. And you know, just that as you heard the story, we heard Markham described as a community. We heard what are the needs of this community? Why are those needs of the community there? And we heard the data presented about demographic and socioeconomic characteristics. And as an audience member, if you were listening to this, then this is connecting to, again, your priorities, your values, your needs. That is where we start. Um, and then as we move to the what, details of what is the details of the action, how they did this, when they did this, all this context, including statistics and some hard data about the action. This is where we're moving from hearing about the problem to hearing about a solution. So we presented a solution, we talked through what we did, we talked through how did that directly address the original problem that was described. So in this case, with the original problem of that there's gender inequity in STEM, but there's the need for a robust talent pipeline. So we need to solve this. And then as we walk through the solution of the details of the program, it was presented, this is how all these elements of this program address those specific aspects of the problem. How does this address the need for mentorship? How does this address the need for building confidence and belief? How does this build social support? All of these elements. And so again, we hear the what, but as an audience member, you're also hearing the what is ultimately the solution to this problem you've just learned about. And then we go into the impact. So we see what is the impact on the program participants and also on the larger community. So you saw the proven results, you saw data, you saw testimonials. And this is the part where we've moved from that, the problem, what is the problem? Here are the solutions, and then also as part of the program design, talked about what were the obstacles to those solutions and how they were addressed. And then we go into what is that impact? And the audience gets to hear about what they can do. So this is where, depending on your audience, you would probably tweak it of when we talk about the impact, when we talk about what your audience can do, what do you need your audience to do? What aspect of this impact is most important for them to understand that they can contribute to? So for example, if you're explaining this to an audience that you needed perhaps more funding to scale up this program or to duplicate it, that this is where you can explain that what they can do to overcome some of these obstacles is perhaps release funding or provide a grant, any of those options. And so this is where we're bringing in, again, what can your audience actually do? And then finally, we have that call to action. So as you said, going from the why, the what, and the impact at the same time, in this case, we are hearing what is the problem, what is the solution, what were the obstacles to this solution, and how were they addressed, what were the outcomes. Now, what can your audience do about that, and what do you need them to do? Next slide, please. So next, we talk about the Marrakesh Treaty implementation, also a fantastic advocacy story. And I'm going to break this down of what makes this an advocacy story and how might this be adapted to different audiences. So again, we heard the why, the what, and the impact. And when we were hearing the why, when you're hearing the context, this is the point where we're hearing what is the problem, what is ultimately the problem. And in this case, the problem is access. And also, we were seeing the problem was, in addition, misunderstanding. So depending again on your audience and what you want them to do, you might emphasize which problem you are trying to get them to solve. In this case, as we move to what is a solution, in that how the implementation of the treaty and the different aspects, the development of the treaty, how this addressed various issues around access is your solution. And so again, depending on your audience, you might emphasize different parts of that and depending on how you want them to participate. And in this case, and a lot of what you heard was about how do we implement this in a way that overcomes some of the misunderstanding, overcomes some of the barriers to actually implementing this. That is, again, we're hearing what were the actions they took? How did they actually address these aspects of the problem? And that's when we move into, again, what the impact was. So again, we showed the impact of the action on people. How did this increase access? How did this increase implementation? How did this increase people's understanding? And then this is the point, again, depending on your audience, if you were, say, trying to work with vendors, if you were working with librarians, again, if you were working with funders, you might emphasize different parts of what part of that solution do you need them to be part of? Do you need them to implement particular standards? Do you need them to be partners in an aspect of implementation? Do you need them to release funding in order for you to do to bring forth all the different things that you need for implementation? And so, again, as you think about your audience and you go back to that, what is your call to action for them? That would affect how you would frame those different aspects. So you have this story of the Marrakesh Treaty, but depending on who your audience is, you might have a different ultimate call for action for them. And so how you frame each of those components would be very important. Next slide, please. So I want to give us a couple examples of some examples of action people have taken. So how you might take some of these advocacy stories, and then what types of calls to action you might be asking a group to do, and what that could look like, and some I think successful examples. So I'm in the United States, and so I'm going to be using two examples from the U.S. Of libraries and librarians that I've worked with. So one, we had librarians in a U.S. state that was facing significant state funding cuts. And this was going to impact the services they could offer. This was going to impact how many people they could serve. This was going to impact their staffing, programming, really every aspect of libraries. And what they needed to do with their in terms of what the solution to this problem was that they needed for people in their state to write their state legislators and ask them to restore funding. And they needed, again, people in their state to do this because your elected officials weren't really going to care if someone from other states wrote in. They didn't vote them in. So they really needed those community members to speak up. So what they did is they told the story of this problem that they were facing, these funding cuts. They told the story of the impact that would have, who that would affect, and they connected it to a lot of different priorities people had, whether that was schooling for their children, whether that was lifelong learning, access to resources, all of those things. And they then told them that the solution was to restore funding so that these things could continue. And then their call to action was telling them to write postcards to their legislators and to tell them how libraries positively impact their lives and to make that case. And what happening is that so many people really respond. So many people wrote that the legislators received piles upon piles of postcards, and they did ultimately vote to restore funding. So it was a successful ultimately advocacy story that they told. And the reason why it was so successful is, like you heard for the two stories before, that they laid out what the problem was and how it affected people's lives, whether that was access, whether that was building a pipeline for the workforce. And then they told them what they could do about it. And they kept it very simple. And they kept it within that audience's capabilities and kind of what sphere of influence they had. So then a second example that is ongoing right now, unfortunately, is that libraries in the US are facing severe federal funding cuts. So the American Library Association is telling the story of how these funding cuts will affect communities, all the different ways this will affect workforce development, affect learning, affect students, affect parents, resources, all of these different aspects. And they've asked library workers as well as community supporters to write letters to their local newspapers to tell their story about the impact of federal money on their community's libraries. And this ask is here is because in this case, part of the problem is that people don't understand all the different ways that libraries intersect with their lives. And that another problem is there are so many things going on in the news right now that it's really easy for libraries to be lost in that shuffle because there's just so many things happening. And so that's why the call to action is tell your story, make people aware, explain the impact in your own community. And people have responded to this call to action. We are seeing so many people publishing letters in their local newspapers talking about the impact that their libraries have on their lives and why having federal funding is so critical to the quality of people's lives. So again, as we think about writing your advocacy story and what your audience's journey is, what the elements of a good story is going to be, having that context, that data, explaining who it impacts, really tailoring it to your audience and what they need to hear. And then, of course, always ending with what do you need them to do and making sure that it is within your audience's capability, their sphere of influence, and it is something that is going to contribute to the solution. Next slide, please. So I'm going to turn now to some example of the ways that you can tell your story and some resources for that. You already heard about the Library Map of the World. This is a wonderful place to submit and share your story. We have the link to it. We will be sending that out, and you can use all of these techniques and methods that you've just learned to write a solid story that can be used in general to advocate for libraries and the importance of libraries. Next slide, please. We also, as an example, if you would like to see how some story collection projects could be structured, we currently have at ALA a story collection project. And if you go to our story collection link, which is here, it has not only a form for sharing and submitting your stories. So if you'd like to look at that form and get some ideas of how you might ask for stories and think about what information you would request from people. And we also have a storytelling tip sheet, which is very similar to a lot of the information that you've seen presented here. And that PDF has some ideas for structuring your story. And again, thinking about the why, the what, the impact, and again, also your audience's journey. So it really combines these things and gives some examples. So those are two great resources. Next slide, please. So finally, you've heard all about how to write a good advocacy story. You've heard examples of two great advocacy stories, and then you heard those broken down and talked about why they work as advocacy stories, as well as some other examples. So you have all been receiving our story, which is the importance of telling library stories. So our call to action is going to be for you to start developing your library advocacy story. We'll have some resources available. We're going to have a worksheet, which I believe is on the next slide, to get some ideas for that. And we will also be sending out some of the examples of these resources that you just saw. And that so our ask to you, our call to action is for you to develop your advocacy story. And the nice thing is that you don't even have to come up with a new place to submit it as you think about stories of what is happening at your library and the impact it has on people's lives, that there is the IFLA Library Map World. And that is a place essentially to submit them, as well as other IFLA programs and platforms and resources. So there are already places that you can submit that story, as well as using it for all of your own advocacy. So that is our call to action for you. And I believe we will now be turning it to Q&A.
Thank you so much, Amelia. That was incredible. And I'd like to invite all the speakers to turn the cameras on. We have time for questions, and I would like to invite our participants today, our attendees, to write their questions on the Q&A section there. And perhaps while we receive those questions, some of the speakers may want to maybe ask each other some questions. I do have one, and perhaps this is for Kim and Amelia. I know you have presented extraordinary examples and so much good information and links. But perhaps I wonder if you have maybe one final recommendation for colleagues or even friends of libraries that might be joining us today or in the future watching the recording about how to address people or even organizations that might not act kind of friendly towards libraries. We are experiencing some sort of wave where there is a bit of hostility towards libraries in in different places, and a bit unpredictable as well because we don't know where this is going to happen. And so I wonder if you have some final recommendations for our colleagues.
I definitely have some. If you don't mind, I'll jump in. So it's such an important question. I'm so glad you asked that. That it is a difficult time, and we really are seeing a lot of hostility, and I think a lot of misinformation and disinformation being perpetuated about libraries and librarians. So there's a lot of ways, I think, to talk to folks and to tell your story in those circumstances. I think one of the pieces that is so key is what was started, Kim started with, that I talked about, which is connecting to your audience and to adapting to your audience. That one of the pieces that I always recommend is you think about the different people that we're talking to, and there's the ones that are very, very hostile. It's going to be very difficult to reach them. There are the folks that are already in our corner. We don't need to reach them quite in the same way. We still need to reach them, but not quite, in the same way. And then we have what I think of as the movable middle, the people that are maybe not actively hostile, but maybe not our library champions yet. They might have heard a lot of bad information about libraries, and so reaching those folks, I find, is that's where I focus on. And one of the best ways I think to reach folks, especially in that position, is finding out what is it that they care about and meeting them where they are. So what are their values? What are their needs? What do they worry about? What keeps them up at night? And connecting to that. So rather than starting with my needs and what libraries need, I start with what they need. And both listening to that, understanding that, I do a lot of listening to folks, even folks that I disagree with, and then that's where we bring in, as Kim talked about, the intervention part of this is how libraries can help that. This is how we already are helping that. This is how we're meeting your needs. And so it kind of starts at that section of we may not agree about everything, but we can find this common ground. This is how we can help you. And I find that that is a good place to start. And that sometimes also kind of helps sidestep some of the very salacious news, clickbaity news, misinformation we have out there and bring back the focus to what do you need and how can I help you get that?
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I see we have two questions. So I will direct everybody here on the speakers, if you can open the Q&A as well. I'll read it and feel free to jump in and address that. Okay, the first one is how can library associations use data collection and storytelling from members to strengthen collective advocacy efforts without overburdening volunteers?
Oh, maybe I'll jump in because my
Yes.
colleague Michelle has asked that question. So hi, Michelle. So one of the that's a really good question because the last piece of your question is really key without overburdening volunteers because we really value our volunteers and everyone's busy and everyone feels overloaded, right? So you know what I was thinking was the library map of the world. In the Canadian section, we have a few stories, and I know that there's a few more on deck. that are getting ready to be put on. Um, as fabulous as the library map of the world is, getting everybody to look at it is a bit tricky. So my suggestion is for the Ontario Library Association and our associations to look at that library map and then use those stories as we might hear at a local level. So take advantage of the work that's been done and see if we can even just like mush it a bit to have it relevant at our more local level. So that's one idea. And Loida, maybe I'll just go to Michelle's second question while we're here. Um, is how do we adapt individual focused advocacy toolkits for use by library associations to mobilize entire sectors? I think that the toolkits are great. We just need to pay attention to audience, and maybe we just, adjust it for the audience that we're looking for. So, here in Canada, we've had a lot of elections lately. And it sounds like because we have a minority government now, we might have another one sooner than we think. So it's a really good opportunity to see if we can take the toolkits that we have and then just do a few tweaks to make them relevant for associations. Diane, over to you.
Well, actually, I'm going to lob the Michelle's question to Amelia. Amelia introduced me to the amazing collection of stories on the ALA site. And I wonder if you could talk a minute or so about that, Amelia, because I think there's some great examples there which would help our audience see the kind of data you need in stories. And I think sometimes we overwhelm ourselves with worry. So I don't know. Amelia, could you let
Absolutely,
us
yeah.
know?
Happy to talk about that. I was actually thinking of a quote as this question came up, which I think is very relevant. So, um, before working with libraries, I worked in advocacy communications, and so I think about stories all the time. I talk about stories all the time. I work with so many different groups trying to tell stories in different ways. And one of the best pieces of advice from my former boss and an incredible mentor was that good messaging is saying something in the simplest way possible so that the most people can understand. It is not, we oftentimes want to say everything. We have so much information, and especially in this field, we want to share all the information, and that's beautiful. But good messaging in that case is being able to explain something so that the most people can understand and distilling it down. How simple can we make this? It's not about dumbing something down or taking out important context. It's can we distill it to its purest form? And so I think that is one piece in terms of thinking about how do we not overwhelm people? What is the getting down to what is the absolute core, and how can we make this a message that the most people can use, that the most people can adapt? So that is one piece. Sometimes I think of it as having just a really good solid cake recipe, and you can put all the frosting you want and like everything else that you need. You can always add things on, but you just need a solid cake recipe. So whatever metaphor works for you. And then a piece so when we were designing the ALA Story Collection project, we were really keeping that in mind. And what we kept going back to of what people needed to hear the most, that simplest message was impact. They needed to hear the impact. And so asking people to explain how libraries impacted their lives, and how uh, that I think putting it into a format because we wanted it to be something that librarians and professionals could use, but also members of the public who don't know library science or may not know how a library is administered or the ins and outs of library funding, that we wanted them to be able to tell their story too. And so when we collected data there, we kept it, we had some checks of we did want to know, was this someone within the profession or was this a community member? We wanted to have some basic information about tell us your story, tell us the impact that it would have. We included that storytelling tip sheet. So we let folks know, here are some ways to structure your story. And then we also, we did give them the option of putting a visual. So if it was easier for them to give a really great picture and explain the context of the picture, we did that. So we tried to give a lot of different ways people could tell their story. And we tried to collect as few data points as we had to. We wanted to have the important parts, but we tried to keep it as minimal because we knew that people would get overwhelmed. Exactly as said in the question, that if you're filling out a long survey, people would go overwhelmed. So we really get back to what do we absolutely need to know. And we also included, I think it's important to say, because of the nature of the environment we're in right now, we gave people different options for privacy. So if they wanted to not be identified by name and to just be identified by their library type and their state, in this case, like a public library in Missouri, they had that option. And so we did need to collect the library type and the state, but that allowed us to then also make them anonymous while still having a useful story. So it wasn't just a library somewhere. Like, we still kept it specific and that impact, but give them the option if they felt that they needed that protection. That might have been a longer answer than you wanted, but I have a lot of thoughts. We spent a lot of time on that form.
I wanted to add one other point, and it sort of ties in with your call to action point, which I think is very powerful. A story needs to touch a person too. It has to, you have to see yourself, or it has to impact you in some way. And I think that's where qualitative data comes in. Kim talked about quantitative and qualitative data. And I think that's where both Catherine and the Marrakesh Treaty story and Hillary's STEAM story, people could see how it personally affected individuals that you can relate to. And I think that has such power as well.
I think another beautiful, there's a researcher at The Ohio State University, Dr. Angus Fletcher, who has a beautiful line. He talks about storytelling a lot, about the science behind storytelling, which was, stories are our oldest technology. We keep going back to them again and again because they take that data, they take information and they make it very digestible, and they touch us, they move us. And so we keep going back to them for that reason. So exactly as you said, Diane, in order for a story to work, like what makes it compelling, why do we tell stories at all, is because they touch us and they move us.
Loida, you just need to turn on.
On mute. All right. We are learning so much. This is such a treat tonight. And I wonder now if we can go around our speakers and maybe they want to share final remark. And then we're going to leave forever in the recording of the webinar. All right, I'll go around as I see you on my screen. Kimberly Silk.
Okay. Well, riffing off of Amelia's comment about simplicity, what I will say is choose a story that is going to target the audience that you want to reach, and then just stick to that one. One of the trickiest things, I think, is to focus on a story and do a really great job with that one. And echoing what Amelia has said, we have so much to say. And I know as a member of this profession, I'm not the only one who gets super excited and wanting to tell people all the things. But if with our audience, we need to just be very, very focused. And if you could keep that messaging simple And, we tell them, and then we tell them, and then we tell them again. And so the simplicity and repetition, I suppose, but respectfully so. And that's my piece of advice.
Thank you so much. Wonder if Catherine and Hillary would like to share any final remarks. Catherine?
The first thing that came to my mind is building on exactly what Kim and Amelia had alluded to, and that is, when you're working in advocacy, the advice is, what can you say in a 30-second elevator speech? And so thinking really succinctly about what your message is that you would like to get across, and keeping that as a very simple question that you want to answer, because it's really easy to get very bogged down into a lot of details. It can expand. You can find new avenues that, as you're doing your exploration on your story, that you want to go down, that other rabbit hole, and it can get very expanded. It can get very diluted in this way. And so I think the biggest thing is to keep it to that one very simple question that you want to answer, and how do you get to the end point from there, and how can you tell that story in 30 seconds in an elevator?
Excellent. We're all striving to do that. All right, Hillary.
Yeah, I would just say, I think what worked really well for the Girls in STEAM project was the fact that we drew in the stakeholders to be part of the project. And I think that was really powerful in terms of us being able to really show the impact of the program. They experienced it firsthand, and we found a way to include them in the story. And I think that worked really well for us.
Thank you so much. Very, very helpful. Amelia.
I would say, I think two things. That one, it's important to not let the perfect be the enemy of the good. And this, I think oftentimes, as you've heard us say, it's so easy to want to gather all the data, all the possible avenues, edit things and make it absolutely perfect. But the truth of the matter is that you're always going to be adapting your story to your audience anyhow. People will give you questions that you'll need to answer on the fly, all kinds of things. And that the so if we wait until we have the absolute perfect story, we'll never tell our story. So I think it's important to just plunge in there, do it. And one of the best ways to learn is by doing it, and that we absolutely can do this. Everyone in this webinar absolutely can do it. That so the beautiful thing about stories is that they've been used for so long. We all tell stories all the time. They cross cultures and ages and generations, everything. We all tell stories. And so you are already telling stories in your day-to-day life. You're already telling stories to move people to take an action. I might tell some of the story of how I need them to do a thing, and I end it with my call to action of, in the end, can you please do this thing for me? And that, so we already are doing that. You already do that in your day-to-day life. This is just scaling it up. This is just giving you some extra tools to do that and how to do it in a new context. So I think that is the biggest piece, is just that, it's most important to get started, use these tools, and you absolutely can do it.
Thank you so much. Yes, empowerment. Okay, I'd like to invite Diane. Do you have final remarks?
Yes, thank you. Well, just to sum up really what everyone has said, I would say that library leaders on this call, library workers on this call, talk, think about what think about what you do and the amazing initiatives you have underway. You might think them to just be very ordinary. Well, in fact, they're probably quite extraordinary. And I would say, talk with your colleagues, look deep within yourself and say, why don't I just tackle a story and work with your colleagues to pull the story together? And as Amelia said, perfection is what is it, the death of good, or I got it backwards. But I just know you're all doing amazing work, and we'd love to hear from you. And we hope this session has been helpful. It's great to talk to you.
Thank you so much to all the speakers, to the North America Regional Division and its chair, Diane Cohen, all the members. This was an amazing effort, and it's a beautiful resource, and it will be available in the next weeks once we get the recording and everything edited out, and it will be shared on the IFLA list and on the other avenues wherever you saw the announcement. Thank you so much. All the very best to everyone. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.